Hi friends, Angie here. Continuing to document some family stuff. Just a heads up, there's a fake profile on YouTube in my name with my profile picture, maybe two of them, commenting, looking like it's me. So if ever you're in doubt about a comment, just click on the channel and see if there's no videos and no subscribers or 1 or 2 subscribers, it's not me, it's a fake profile. So I've reported it. But having uploaded yesterday the Irish Republican little family story, I'm going to do an audio reading of a book by Frances Mary Power. She did the most amazing research. She got back further than academics that were on full-time grants to do this kind of research. And she was just, you know, a housewife, basically. But she was so superb at it, she actually got really badly attacked and gave me permission to publish because she had not done it for academic acclaim or competition purposes. But anyway, without further ado, it's a surprising background on the Power family because, as I say, my father was a very strong character. And although he was an expatriate, he emigrated from Ireland at the age of 19. He was born in 1926, so 1945 he emigrated and joined the British military and didn't get back full-time until he was 53. But he always raised us to identify as Irish Catholic Republicans. So it was quite shocking to me that the genealogy, you know, reveals Protestant land donated chancellors and sirs and lords and connections with Madonna and Gwen Stefani and Princess Diana and Camilla Parker Bowles and so on and so forth. So it's fascinating, and I'm just going to do an audio reading of it. I haven't published. I'm still in a time warp, wishing there was an old-fashioned literary agent and publisher, because I've got like 5 books backed up that could be published straight away. But in the meantime, I'll do audios of them. I still need to finish Curious Tale. I can't remember what the working title is, but I've almost finished documenting the Kenya project, which was supporting an orphanage in Kenya for 7 years, and then the trolls messed that up, which was very tragic. But it was also quite fascinating what went on in there. So I'll finish that one soon, and I'll start this one. So here we go. Let's go screen share. It's on my blog. It's also on my Facebook notes, but they can be quite hard to find. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I'll move this up here. Poetry in Motion, the genealogy, or genealogy. How do people say it? They say this differently, don't they? So I'll make this a bit bigger because of my eyesight. We'll just start reading, and here we go. Poetry in Motion, the genealogy of the Power clan de la Poer, as researched by Frances Mary. So I wrote this in 2016, or I transcribed it. Mary sent it to me. Frances Mary sent it to me, and I transcribed it. So I wrote, a lovely lady called Frances Mary née Power, living in America, contacted me about our genealogy. She had been rated top genealogy researcher while she was tracing the Powers. She found out we were related to Princess Diana, Madonna, Gwen Stefani, amongst others, Vikings, and then English Protestants, chancellors, knights, and ladies to the monarchy. Oh, what a shock for my Sinn Féin Irish Catholic Republican soul. Indeed. I have not edited or placed the copious notes from Frances, but hope the rest of the clan will find them as fascinating as I did. The powers that be, this is a four-part note until it's in book form. The powers that be were Danish Vikings who worshipped Odin and Thor. Their leader, Rollo, had fallen out with the then king and he became quite powerful, and they sacked Paris. As they were formidable and kept coming back, the Norsemen were given a huge parcel of land and bred with the Franks there. They then became Normans, who invaded England in 1066, though there may have been a group waiting for the invaders to arrive. There were certainly the Vatican's men waiting along the Sussex coast. The Le Poers, as well as being knights, chancellors, were also churchmen, and the name is derived from the phrase, "he who has made a vow of poverty." Wow, isn't that interesting? I rebuke that vow of poverty over our family line now in Jesus' name. Poer means in essence poor. Wow. There are some branches of the family named Poer. They were far from poor and had fabulous wealth and influence. My niece has tried to chase it. Much dissipated and can be traced in part to losses such as the ship which went down, Alice Catella stealing the Le Poer inheritance, etc., etc. The power motto is "from the cross to the crown." De Poer, Cambrio-Normans, the most ferocious warriors because they combined the armor of Troy with the savagery of the Vikings, berserkers. They toured with Rollo and sacked Paris. They are mentioned in the Le Fayet's roll and are present in lots of royal family trees. I think this is partly why my sisters and I were targeted as lost bloodline descendants. Poer family. Poer Hayes derived its name from the Poer family, with whom the Duke family intermarried several times during the 15th and 16th centuries. It was a family long established in Devon, and even more so in the adjacent counties of Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, and Dorset. It's interesting, Wiltshire and Gloucestershire are places we've lived. Bradford-on-Avon in Wiltshire, went to school in Bath in Somerset. My mother was evacuated to Dorset, Somerset, and my sister was put in a children's home, aka an MK Ultra project in Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. Of the various Poer family arms, only those of Wiltshire and Dorset, and of a Cornwall branch derived from Devon, resemble those of the Devon family. The circumstantial evidence for a tie between the Devon line and the Wiltshire and Dorset Poer families is very strong. The Poer family made a place for themselves among the Anglo-Norman aristocracy and gentry of England quite early. Roger Le Poer, or Le Poer, was Chancellor of England under King Stephen and died, look how far back her research goes, it's amazing, died in 1139. He appears to be the first of the Le Poers to have achieved national importance in England. Roger, Robert, William, and Simon Le Poer took part in the conquest of Ireland, accompanying Strongbow, and it's believed that they were all brothers. Roger, who died in 1186, was the most conspicuous of these. Some of the Le Poer families subsequently remained in Ireland, ultimately receiving the title Earl of Tyrone. Burke's General Armoury notes that in 1535, Roger Le Poer's descendant Richard Le Poer, or Power, of Curragh Moor, County Waterford, was made Lord Le Poer. Waterford is where my grandfather, Tom Power, hails from. However, some descendants of the Le Poer brothers returned to England. For example, in the reign of Henry II, William Le Poer held lands in Oxfordshire, Herefordshire, and Gloucestershire, and Robert Le Poer held property in Oxfordshire. Herbert, that name, Le Poer was the last bishop at Sarum, or Sarum in Wiltshire, and Richard Le Poer was the first bishop at the new cathedral at Salisbury, serving from 1217 to 1229. He later served as Bishop of Durham and died in 1237. Richard and Herbert were sons of Richard of Ilchester, Bishop of Winchester and Chancellor of England. They were necessarily illegitimate, since bishops couldn't marry. Oh my God. Medieval England was notoriously lax, however, about the chastity of the priesthood. The Dictionary of National Biography observes of Herbert Le Poer, Bishop of Sarum, in the early 13th century, that Dr. Stubbs suggests that he was connected with Roger Poer, see Roger, and therefore also with Roger of Salisbury and Richard Fitz-Neal. Canon Rich Jones conjectured that Poer was in this case the equivalent not of pauper, but of puer, or the Norman puer, a knight or cadet of good family, Anglo-Saxon, kilt. He has also pointed out that near Tarrant in Dorset, where Herbert's brother Richard was born, there are places called Porstock and Porton. The names of Porstock and Porton in Dorset are more commonly given as Powerstock and Powerton, both modernised forms of Poer. Canon Jones' interpretation seems very likely to be correct. Poor is the equivalent in this case of Poer. Richard Le Poer's history was quite distinguished overall, but the best known accomplishment of his career was certainly the movement of the see from Sarum to Salisbury and the erection of Salisbury Cathedral. He organised the effort and found the funds for the construction of this jewel among the Gothic cathedrals of England, sometimes criticised as too perfect and a bit austere, but always regarded as one of the most historically and architecturally important buildings in England, a nearly pure example of early English Gothic. He also left less tangible monuments. Richard Le Poer is credited with the final form of the use of Sarum, the liturgy that became dominant throughout much of England and is one of the primary forerunners of the Book of Common Prayer of the Anglican Communion. The Sarum rite spread throughout much of southern England and is regarded as among the most elaborate forms of Christian religious service. The elaborate splendour of Sarum ceremonial, as carried out in the cathedral church in the centuries immediately preceding the Reformation, contrasted vividly with the comparative simplicity of the practice of the Roman Church. Richard founded a Cistercian house for nuns and their servants at his birthplace, Crawford Tarrant in Dorset. And interestingly, I think my Auntie Mary the nun, I think she was in an order of Cistercians, even though they identified as Catholic. He also has been credited, probably erroneously, with the Ancran Rewell, a treatise on the monastic life that has been described as one of the most perfect models of simple, natural, eloquent prose in our language. And finally, as if this were not a sufficiently full life, Richard resided for some time, including minimally the year 1223, at Sherborne Castle in Dorset. Quote, but it would have been as Sheriff of Dorset and not as Bishop of Salisbury that he held it. Gilbert de Staplebridge acted for Richard as under-sheriff. Clearly, the medieval conception of appropriate episcopal roles differed from later standards. It may be more than coincidence that Walter Le Poer was Sheriff of Devon in 1222, probably overlapping Richard's tenure as Sheriff of adjacent Dorset. The sheriffs were royal appointments, at this time frequently given to related members of families trusted by the crown. Walter le Poer was also a collector of the lay subsidy in Worcestershire in 1226. Tax collectors, I'm not proud of some of this. A justice itinerant in Worcestershire in the same year, and in 1227 justice itinerant for Oxford, Hereford, Stafford, and Salop, Shropshire. These are all places we've been posted in the military. Hereford, Sharon was born. Shropshire. Yeah, that's interesting. William le Poer was Sheriff of Devon in 1222 until 1224, and was described as possibly an, quote, outsider not native to Devon. The appointment of the Poers in and after 1222 marks the first appearance of the family in Devonshire. There are references to the Poer family in the pleas of the Devon heir, dealing with civil litigation of 1238. Hugh le Poer was listed as one who pledged for the fine of Walter Lossonnet and Ralph de Habs in the case of the abduction of Robert de Sicaville de Stracville in Witheridge 100. Stephen le Poer was held in default for failing to appear for the first day as a juror in Braunton 100. He held land valued at one knight's fee in Churchill, East Down, Barony of Dartington. I nearly went to college at Dartington. Interesting. In 1238, Roger le Poer was an elector for Sancta Maria Oteri 100, held by the dean and chapter of Rouen Cathedral. In 1242 to 43, he was a juror in the Budley 100 and a tenant at Yethermeeton, at Blakeburg, and at Raplinghay, a feoffee of Jean de Courtenay, Earl of Devon. I might be pronouncing some of these medieval words wrong. The Blakeburg property was in the honour of Plympton, held of the Sheriff of Devon. There is doubtless some connection with William le Poer's service in this position in 1222 to 1224. At some date between 1242 and 1254, a Philip le Poer was a witness to a gift to the priory of the Church of Ashbury, Devon. It seems likely that William le Poer, Sheriff of Devon in 1222 to 1224, was father of Roger, and perhaps also of Stephen and Hugh le Poer, since there is no evidence of a pre-existing Devonshire le Poer line to provide alternatives. Thus, the genealogy of Cecily Poer, who married Jean-Duc's son William, was from William le Poer or le Poer, Sheriff of Devon in 1222 to 1224, to Roger, elector for Outery St Mary in 1238, and juror in 1242, through several generations to John Poer, feoffee of the Dowager of the Earl of Devon in 1377, to his son Roger, father of Cecily. Nutwell is south of Exeter on the Exe River. The Prideaux were long established in this area. The family was begun in England by Paginus de Prideaux, who held Prideaux Castle in Cornwall under William I, suggesting participation in the Norman conquest of 1066. Their family crest includes the head of a Saracen, denoting their participation in the Crusades. Herden Prideaux, great-grandson of Paginus de Prideaux and son of Nicholas de Prideaux, died 1169, married the daughter and heiress of Ralph Orcharton of Orchton, Devon. This established the Devonshire line of the family, which after the termination of the Cornwall line in 1387 was the senior line. The Devon family included Sir Geoffrey Prideaux, who died in about 1243, Sir Roger Prideaux, born about 1224, and Sir Ralph Prideaux, born about 1243. In 1346, Thomas Prideaux served in the war in France, presumably at Crécy and Calais, with John Trevagnon of the king's retinue. See, this ties all in with, this is why I say they intermarry people without they're realizing they're being manipulated. So my mother was a Dupré, French Huguenot. My second husband was a Disney Dissigny from Paris, from France rather, that came to England, I believe, with William the Conqueror in 1066. Half of the Disney settled in Norton Disney and the other half came to Ireland and then went to America and spawned Walt Disney in that side of the family. So I'm going to, right. Other members of the Prideaux family were fifis of the very powerful Courtenay family. Earls of Devonshire, Jean Prideaux, Knight, died 1403, was the son of Sir Roger Prideaux of Orchton, and Joan, the heiress of Peter Clifford. Sir John was a commissioner of array in Devon between 1379 and 1392, and was a Knight of the Shire in the Parliaments of October 1383 with Sir Robert Cornu, and February 1388 with Sir Philip Courtenay. He and his family had close connections with the Earl. His sister's son, Robert Scobhole, was another of the Earl's esquires. His cousin, also John Prideaux, married the daughter of Robert French, one of Earl Edward's lawyers, in the 1390s. Sir John himself acted as a fifi of the Earl in 1383 and witnessed with him a charter of Thomas Beauchamp. The Nutwell branch, from which Richard Duke's wife came, was established by a cadet branch of this line. The Danes, strengthened with Swedes, also battled on in France. They fought their way up the rivers of Weser, Rennes, Maas, and Seine into France, or Valland, as they called it. In the history books from the French monasteries, one can read about their triumphs. See, interesting again, my Auntie Mary the nun, we called her always in the family, Sister Angela Marie, was a Mother Superior, Reverend Mother, Mother Superior, Mother Provincial, with an order of nuns with their mother house, l'Abbaye de Saint-Sever-le-Vicomte, in France. It's very interesting. They tell about the great forces which besieged Paris at Easter 845, commanded by no one less than Ragnar Lodenbrock, which, according to the tales, governed over Sweden, Denmark, Finland, parts of England, and some assorted countries in the east. He came with 120 ships and 5,000 warriors. When they closed in on Paris, the French King Karl the Bald fled to the monastery of Saint-Denis, where he prayed to the saints Dionysus, Saint-Germain, and Saint Germanus. Anyhow, nothing helped. And the 28th of March, the great army of the Vikings stood outside the walls of Paris. To convince the people of Paris that they should give their gold to the Vikings, they killed some of their prisoners before the eyes of the Paris people. The king could not do anything else than give the Vikings what they wanted, and after some trading, they left with over £7,000 worth of silver, which in those days was an enormous amount of money. This kind of money showed what the city had to offer if they would come back, and they did. They came every summer afterwards, especially after the wine harvest. The city of Rouen was destroyed 6 times. Usually they struck on a religious holiday or during the market period. Anytime really when there were a lot of people with a lot of goods in the city. After some years, Ranier's son Bjorn Jansede took over the enterprise from his father and was kidnapped. Karl the Great's grandsons, Ludwig and Goslin, and the ransom, which the now more or less broke Karl the Bald had to pay, brought his country to the verge of economic ruin. In the year 885, a large number of Vikings besieged Paris, but they didn't give in, and after some time, the Vikings gave up and fled towards the Bourgogne. Ragnar Lodbrok had several sons, which all got very famous for their capacities as warriors and merchants. They had interesting names like Ivar Benlis, Sigurd Ormuga, and in some history books, Hastein, in Central Europe, Hastings. According to the tales, the two brothers Hastings and Bjorn, Jernsider, led an expedition down the French coast. They fought in Aquitanian, went up the river Garonne into the wine district of Bordeaux. They visited Saint-Emilion. I've been to all these places. I stayed in Bordeaux for a month. I was 12 or 13. Yeah, in the late 60s. They threatened Toulouse and plundered a bit at the coast of Asturias and continued to Sevilla up the river Guadalquivir to threaten the Moors, led by Abdul Rahman II. He managed to defend himself this time, but more attacks were to follow. Then, according to the Eddas, the brothers started a Mediterranean cruising, which has no parallel. They got through Gibraltar, where we were also stationed. When I read this, it just flipped me out, because it's as if my family has been moved to all these locations, particularly in my father's 25 years in British military. It's very bizarre. So we lived for 3 years in Gibraltar. Right. They got through Gibraltar, Norversund, plundering Algeciras and Murcia on the way. Wow. They landed in Mallorca, where they took slaves, which they sold in North Africa, Blaireland, Morocco. Wow. They sailed down to the coast of southern France, plundering and taking whatever they wanted. Roussillon, Narbonne, Arles, and Nîmes were visited. They went up the river Rhone and stayed over the winter on an island there. Thereafter, they started a spring campaign with a little trip to Italy, Languedoc, Lombardia. See? And I have a daughter born to a son of a Sicilian and a Calabrian, connected to the Priory of Sion and the Sicilian Mafia. I didn't marry her father, but I had her before I got married to the Disney. Wow. Where they plundered Pisa and the area of Ligurian. They also, according to Normandic authors, invaded the city Luna as they thought it to be Rome. In order to invade the city, they used a very sly tactic. They convinced the citizens of Luna that their leader had been killed and that they now wanted to give him a Christian burial. To do this, they were let in through the town gates. As soon as they'd gotten inside, the supposedly dead person sprung to life and promptly killed anyone in sight, opened the gates and let the rest of the Vikings in. On their way home, they passed the island Sicelo, Sicily, Blaireland, where they sold everything they robbed from Sicelo and grabbed more slaves, which they in turn sold on to Ireland. I knew Irish slaves had been sold in America, but I didn't know Sicilian slaves were sold in Ireland. Dear God. Wow. Historically, it's been confirmed that Vikings had been in Spain. The largest recorded attack came the 31st of July, 844, when a larger attack force hit the shores of Asturias. After this, it continued. Probably it was Hastings and his brother, via Galician to Lisbon, been there too, which was plundered. Then the turn came to Sevilla and Cadiz. The Arabic historian Ibn al-Qutiyya has described when the Maju, the Vikings, came up the river of Guadalquivir. After this first encounter, the man in power, not surprisingly, hastily built a city wall in Sevilla, and they started to construct battleships which could meet the enemy out in the open water. An ambassador was also sent, a poet and historian with the name Al-Ghazal, to the north to meet with this strange people and establish a friendly relationship. The ambassador wrote about his journey but forgot to tell the name of the country he arrived in. In his books, he writes that the kingdom consisted of several islands far up in the north. There were a lot of fountains, and the natives worshipped the fire. There were also many Christians there. Probably he had arrived in Iceland. Unfortunately, he got into a lot of trouble when he tried to have an affair with the king's wife. And it took him quite some time to recover from this. He stayed for a year, and as a result, the Viking expeditions expired for some time. Rollo, or Rolf the Pirate, as he was called in French history books, was a rather fascinating man. He was an outlaw even by Viking standards, and had been robbing, slaughtering, and plundering all over the French coast for some time. When he got tired of this, he sailed up through Seine and into Paris, where he besieged. After some time, the whole country around Paris had been so thoroughly plundered that the French king in Sweden, called Karl den Enfeldiger, Karl the Stupid, had to negotiate with Rollo. They met in the little community of St. Clair at the River Epte between Rouen and Paris. Here they signed a contract which gave Rollo the control over all the land between Epte at Seine to the border of Bretagne. This land is today called Normandy. The French king had no longer any jurisdiction over this country. He was not entitled to get any taxes, or enroll men in his army, or even appoint a new duke in this county. The treaty was sealed with a marriage between Rollo and the French king's daughter. What she thought about that is not told. Gisela. That he was married before this was obviously of no importance. To be able to get married, he had to be baptized. This was done in the church of St. Clair, where the marketplace in front of the church still is, named Place Rollo. The Frenchmen formed a group on one side and the Vikings on the other. The ceremony was held by Robert of Francion. After the ceremony and the treaty had been signed, Rollo was meant to kiss the king's foot to show that he accepted the king as his superior. As Rollo, according to himself, didn't have any superiors, he refused to do this. After a short quarrel, a representative was sent forward to do it in Rollo's place. He, it is told, stepped forward, took the foot in his hand, lifted it up, kissed it, lifted the king in his feet, and threw him out the window. Needless to say, this wasn't very popular amongst the Frenchmen. The treaty is no longer available, but has been reviewed by the author Dudos in his book Historia Normanorum. During a quarter of a century, from the 8th of June 793, amazing research, Francis Mary, until the 15th of October 1066, these men would come in waves, often young and seeking a fight, and extremely skilled as sailors and warriors. Their activities left traces for eternity. Only 900 of the most common English words come from the Vikings. Sky, skin, scrape, skirt, husband, husbande, and window, vindu, are some examples. There are over 600 village names in England which can be directly related to the Vikings. Grimsby, Thoresby, Brimtoft, Langtoft, and so on. There are English counties where about 75% of the village names derived from the Vikings. On the Shetland Islands, the percentage goes up to about 99%. In the northeast of England, the Nordic languages were spoken until as late as the 12th century. On the Isle of Man, until the middle of the 15th century. Now we go on to talk about Ainsley Bertram Power, submitted by DNA study participant number 18. In the 1891 census in March, Hiram and Frances Power were lodgers at 4 Alderson Road, Wavertree, England. Frances was 7 months pregnant at this time. On the 14th of May, 1891, she had a baby boy, Ainsley Bertram Power. At the time, Hiram was a bookkeeper and was good at his trade. By the 1901 census, the family had moved back to Topsett Park, and Hiram had become a secretary for an insurance company. By 1911, with Bart off her hands, Frances began her own business, as is noted in the Liverpool Trade Directory. This was carried out on the corner of Ollet Road and 6 Rutland Avenue in South Liverpool. By the time he died in 1932, Hiram had risen to a shipping director. Bert sailed to Wellington, New Zealand on the ship SS Ionic in 1910. From the age of 19, he travelled around Wellington until about 1917, when he met Elizabeth Campbell, who was quite taken with him. In February 1917, they moved to Fielding, some miles north, where they married in the Catholic Church on the 10th of February 1917. Bert became a travelling salesman, travelling around the countryside. Meanwhile, Elizabeth bore him 2 sons, Ainsley Leslie Power in February 1919 and Francis Daniel Power in 1920. By 1928, Bert had tired of Elizabeth and divorced her on the 13th of July of that year. Very unusual back in the 20s. 3 days later, he married Myrtle Claire Cameron from Hawera in Palmerston North. 2 years later, they moved to Wanganui, where Bert became the manager for Dominion Motors. Then World War II broke out. This time, Bert elected to join up. He flew over to Brisbane, Australia with Myrtle, and putting his age down 10 years, joined the Royal Australian Army. He went into the training camp at Puckapunyal down in Victoria. Here he was stationed with the Petrol Park as a corporal for 3 months. He was then discharged as he was required in a reserved occupation. It would appear this reserved occupation was his promotion to an officer of the Royal Australian Navy, as he became a mining engineer in March 1942, first as a sub-lieutenant and then promoted to a lieutenant. In October 1945, Bert was discharged. Not long after this, Bert divorced Myrtle and married Meta Lorraine Bennett White in New South Wales, Australia. Myrtle had had no children. Gary Ainsley Power was born on the 19th of December 1947. They lived in Poer, New South Wales, and Bert returned to his favourite occupation as a car salesman. He died on the 31st of March 1963 at the age of 72. Lorraine died in 1969. Gary joined the Royal Australian Air Force in June 1965 as an engineer mechanic fitter. He served in Vietnam with the Caribou Squadron. At some time during his time in the Air Force, Gary married Margaret Ann Teresa Richardson. In 1972, Gary was promoted to corporal and was transferred to New Guinea, where he became a loadmaster of the Caribou, A4233. He was part of the crew flying between Lae and Port Moresby. On the 28th of August 1972, Gary's plane had flown back and forth twice during the day, and on the third trip back from Lae, there were 26 air cadets on board. As they flew through the valley known as Kujeru Gap, the fog came down to 0, and as the pilot turned around in an attempt to gain altitude, flew into the treetops. Although 5 cadets survived, one later died in hospital. Gary was cremated in Sydney's northern suburb cemetery. Currickmore House by Orla Fitzgerald. Originally printed in Waterford Today, April the 18th, 2000. I'd love to hear from you, Orla. The word Currickmore comes from 2 Irish words meaning great marsh. 2 families claim the titles of Currickmore House, one by direct descent, the Gertine family, the other legal right, the Currickmore family, or the de la Poer Beresfords. Wow. The descendants of the La Poer family, who accompanied Henry II in his invasion of Ireland, were the originators of the name in this country. Henry II made a grant of the city of Waterford with all the circumjacent province to Sir Robert La Poer. So rude. How can somebody just give this area, land of Waterford, thousands of acres, hundreds of acres, just make a grant of it to somebody else? What were these aristocrats thinking? So Henry II made a grant of the city of Waterford with all the circumjacent province to Sir Robert La Poer, who was the ancestor of the Waterford family. The eldest son of Sir Robert was Sir John de Poer, Baron of Dunoil, and it seems the father built Donisle Castle, the Dunoil family being the parent stock of all the Waterford branches. The Currickmore line of the family originated with Roger, 3rd son of the 1st Baron, and it's he who is said to have built the ardent castle of Currickmore. A descendant of Roger was Richard Poer, Lord of Currickmore, who was Sheriff of the county and who died in 1493. His grandson, another Richard, was the person from whom the grant title of Barony of Power and Currickmore came. The first Lord of Currickmore was married to Catherine Butler, a lady who was the daughter of Piers, the 8th Earl of Ormond, by his wife Margaret Fitzgerald, a celebrated character. Sir Richard, 1st Lord of Currickmore, was slain, according to English annals, while on service for the crown by a traitor before 1538. The line of Currickmore House ended with Lady Catherine Beresford, née Power, who married Sir Marcus Beresford. I'm curious about this Beresford. I'm wondering if it links up in any awful way with Bono. Hewson. Through the marriage with Poer in the female line, her husband was created Earl of Tyrone in 1746, but the inheritance of the title in the male line passed to the Gertine family. Numerous were the houses and branches of this family, besides those of Dunoil and Currickmore. There were also Carrigaline, Corbeny, Faithleg, Bellevue, Snow Hill, Kilfan, and Currageen, to name just a few. A history of Waterford would be incomplete without at least a brief outline of the descendants of this family. Most powers in Ireland have no idea they have Protestant heritage. It's amazing. There are many sources of interest to the visitor to this estate. The first and most notable object of interest is the little church of Clonegam. Clonegam is a parish, and the public road from Ballyquin Gate leads to the gate of the church, which stands inside on the grounds. The church was rebuilt in 1841. Considerable historic interest is attached to this spot, and the inscriptions in some of the tombs are those of people who were highly respected and admired in their time. At the top of the church is the splendid work of art raised to the memory of Sir Marcus Beresford, Earl of Tyrone, and Countess Catherine, by whose marriage the old baronies of Beresford and de Poer were united. Another interesting monument on Curraghmore Estate is the Round Tower, which is situated on a hill and was built by the first Marquis, George de Poer Beresford, to commemorate the death of his son in a riding accident. The view from the tower is picturesque, and the inscription on the tower read, Le Poer Tower, erected in the year 1785 by George, Earl of Tyrone, to his beloved son, his niece, and friend. Curraghmore House is situated in the lovely valley of the Clodagh River, which enters at Lowry's Bridge and almost halves the land of Curraghmore. The half nearest Carrick-on-Shore is the portion which was originally in possession of the de la Poers. Carrick-on-Shore, yeah. The section of land on the other side of the river, viz. The woods of Portlall, Bailech, and Darrigal, were obtained by purchase from the Ducat and Medicott families. The area inside the boundary wall is 4,000 acres and outside is 3,000 acres, making a total of 7,000 acres of majestic, lofty hills, sumptuous vales, and richly varied woods, which ennoble the natural magnificence and beauty of this ancient home of the Powers. At a distance, the mansion is imposing, being flanked on either side by rows of offices enclosing a courtyard leading to the ancient castle front. The mansion was built by Earl James in 1700, but there is no record of the building of the ancient castle, which is ascribed to Roger, third son of the first Baron, 1197. A spacious dwelling house was built at the rear of the ancient castle. Anybody visiting Curraghmore Estate must take a look at the Shell House. It's a grotto. I've been there. Made entirely of shells, built by Lady Catherine Beresford. The patient work of completing the Shell House lasted 7 years, ending in 1651. Tourists to the area could also take a trip to the starfish-shaped village of Portlall. Even if one merely takes a Sunday stroll through the grounds of Curraghmore Estate, it should be noted that its very historical location worthy of close attention, which deals with the Normandic Duke's history. Back in Normandy, the Nordic king showed what he was worth, and surprisingly, he turned out to be a very good and rather popular king. He and his people soon settled down in this new country. They got baptized, adopted the Christian faith, married local girls, and in general blended in with the natives. But the ruling family retained some of the Viking spirit, and for several hundred years they were a force to be dealt with. One of his ancestors became Wilhelm the Conqueror. His name was Guillaume le Conquérant, which in 1066 conquered England and became the new king. Richard the Lionheart is one of his ancestors. Other persons related to Rollo's family played important roles. Among them were some Christian knights, which played an important role in the First Crusades of the years 1095 and 1099. They founded the kingdom Nepal, Sicily, and conquered Lebanon, and created yet another kingdom in Syria. Wow. I lost a baby to a Lebanese man that I was in love with. So had that child lived, I lost her 5 months, 5.5 months, named her Amy. Had Amy lived, I would have a child from a Lebanese, a Sicilian, and 2 Disney. Who was pulling the strings? They stayed here until 1402. The same year, a Normandic knight created his own small kingdom at the Canary Islands. This is so bizarre. The Arabic messenger Ibn Fadlan, who was in Bulgar during the summer of 922, saw the Vikings arrive, and he wrote, "I have never before seen such perfect bodies. They were tall like palm trees, blonde with a few of them red. They do not wear any jackets or kaftana. The men instead wear dresses which cover one side of the body but leave one hand free. Every one of them brings with them an axe, a sword, and a knife. They never leave these things. Their swords are broad, grooved, and of French make. From their bellies to their necks, they are tattooed in green with trees and other pictures. All of their women have a small box attached over the breast. This can be made of iron, silver, copper, or gold. On each box, there is a ring to which a small knife is attached. Around their necks, they wear necklaces of gold and silver." Dudos, in his book Historia Normanorum, during a quarter of a century, from 8th of June 793 until 15th of October 1066, these men would come in waves, often young and seeking a fight, and extremely skilled as sailors and warriors. Their activities left traces for eternity. Over 900 of the most common, English words come from the Vikings. I think we read that bit. We've got a bit of a repeat here. Seeking a fight. The manor of Poer, it is recorded, was in the possession of the de Poer family for well over 200 years. Situated to the northwest of the village that we know today as East Budleigh. A Walter de Poer was in the service of King John for a time and became the Sheriff of Devon in 1222. It suggests that he may have been present at the signing of the Magna Carta. When the last Poer heiress, Cecilia, married into the Duke family from Sherborne in Dorset, the manor passed into their hands and remained there for another 300 years, known as Poor Hayes, then Duke's Hayes, and then simply Hayes. The manor house, better known as Hayes Barton, the birthplace of Sir Walter Raleigh, whose father, also Walter, was renting it from the Duke family. The Raleighs tried to buy the house eventually, but it's never been sold into private hands. Today it remains the property of the Clinton Devon estates, just 4 owners in 900 or so years. Clinton, that's weird. The first creation for Wikipedia, 2233 on the 7th of March 06. Is that 2006 or 1906? I don't know. William Power, Keating, Trench, 1st Earl of Clancarty from 1741 to 1805. He served as an MP in the Irish House of Commons, supporting the Whigs. Was advanced to the Irish House of Lords as Baron Kilconnell of Garbally. In 1800, further advanced to the position of Viscount Dunlow. In 1800, as a reward for his continuing support of the Whig Party, WHIG. 2 years later, he became Earl of Clancarty. His choice of this title is said to have been derived from a tenuous link to the Munster Earls of Clancarty, who had been deprived of the title by the English crown. He therefore became the first Earl of Clancarty in his second creation and had no shortage of male heirs, 10 in all. He was succeeded by Richard le Poer Trench, 2nd Earl of Clancarty. And then we've got all the references. I'll put the links to the written document in the description box. This is a 4-part book, and I'm just going to read one part at a time. So for those of you that are still with me. Thank you. Poer family. Poer's Hayes derived its name from the Poer family, with whom the Duke family intermarried several times during the 15th and 16th centuries. It was a family long established in Devon and even more so in the adjacent county. I think we've read that part. The Poer family made a place for themselves among the Anglo-Norman aristocracy and gentry of England quite early. Roger le Poer was Chancellor of England under King Stephen, died in 1139. He appears to be the first of the le Poers to have achieved national importance in England. Roger, Robert, William, and Simon le Poer took part in the conquest of Ireland, accompanying Strongbow. Right, I think we've read this. Yeah. The Dictionary of National Biography observes Herbert le Poer, Bishop of Sarum in the early 13th century. Yeah, this is a repeat of some of this. Quite distinguished, but is best known. Yeah, Salisbury Cathedral. Yeah, Richard founded a station. Yeah, this is a repeat. And finally, as I think there are reference in the Pleas of the Devon Heir. One who pledged for the line of Walter Losney and Ralph de Haps in the case of the abduction of Robert de Sicapien de Stratwell. Yeah. Yeah, I think I double copied there. So historically it's been confirmed that, yeah, that's a double copy of what we had there. So that's part one. Was connected through his mother, Frances Power of Corheen. Oh no, I haven't read this bit. This is Westmeath, which is just down the road from me. So forgive me, people, it's the first draft. If there's an editor or a publisher interested, get in touch with me. I sorted it out. So we've read that. Back in Normandy, the Nordic king showed what, yeah, we've read that. The Arabic messenger Ibn Fadlan, yeah, we've read that. His portrait is given in a fine French print representing the Congress of Vienna. So maybe it's not my mistake, double copying. Maybe it's in the original manuscript. His portrait is given in a fine French print representing the Congress of Vienna. He was succeeded by his oldest son, William le Poer Trench, 1803 to 1872. Here's some new. Lady Louisa Trench, 7th of February, 1881. William Thomas le Poer Trench, 3rd Earl of Clancarty. We've got the dates. Commander Frederick Robert le Poer Trench. We've got the dates. To his family, he not only left the impressive house at Garbly, and considerable wealth, but also the right to use the name and arms of le Poer, as had been the wish of his great-grandfather. The death of the 2nd Earl of Clancarty at Kinnegad, County Westmeath, 24th November. His portrait is given in a fine French print representing the Congress of Vienna. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Richard le Poer Trench. William Power Keating Trench, the 1st Earl of Clancarty, was connected through his mother, Frances Power of Corheen, with Donna McCarthy, the 4th Earl of Clancarty of the first creation. Born in 1741, he sat in the Irish Parliament from 1769 to 1797 for the seat of Garbly in County Galway, supporting Flood's motion for leave to bring in a reform bill, 29th of November 1783, opposed Pitt's commercial propositions when brought forward by Ord, 12th of August 1785, but was attacked in 1791 by George Ponsonby for declaring that a majority was necessary for the government and that he would support them in their necessary and essential measures. Irish Parliament. He was created an Irish peer on the 25th of November 1797 with the title of Baron Kilconnell of Garbly. I hope I'm saying that right. And was further advanced to Viscount Dunlow, 1801, and the Earl of Clancarty, 1803. Now we go on to Arthur McMurrough Kavanagh. Fascinating stuff. Arthur was born at Boris House, County Carlow, on the 25th of March, 1831, the third son of Thomas Kavanagh, by his second wife, Lady Harriet Margaret Le Poer Trench, daughter of Richard, 2nd Earl of Clancarty. His father was MP for Kilkenny in the last Irish Parliament and for County Carlow in the last two Parliaments of the United Kingdom under George IV and the first Parliament under William IV. His family traced its descent to the Kings of Leinster. 1805, McClintock. John McClintock Jr. marries secondly Lady Elizabeth Trench, a daughter of the first Earl of Clancarty by Anne Gardiner, daughter of the Right Honourable Charles Gardiner of Dublin. Clancarty actually died on 27th of April that year, aged 64, and was succeeded by his eldest surviving son, Richard Le Poer Trench, 2nd Earl of Clancarty, the diplomat. Richard was the product of a marriage between a Cambrian Norman family of Le Poers to the Huguenot Trench family, who moved to Ireland following leaving France due to political problems. That's when the Dupreys moved to England, my mother's family, French Huguenots. Richard Le Poer Trench, 2nd Earl of Clancarty, also descended. Both the Chenevix and Trenches were of Huguenot origin. Master of the Mint, Richard Le Poer Trench, 2nd Earl of Clancarty, 1812 to 1814. Sir Robert Le Poer Trench, KCB, KTS, and Lieutenant Colonel, 74th Regiment. This memorial has been erected by his brother, Richard the Earl of Clancarty. There's a reference there. The 2nd Earl was William's eldest son, Richard. He was a consummate politician and spent many years as a diplomat for the Crown. In his dealings with the people of Ballinasloe, Richard had a double standard. On the one hand, he was a fair landlord by the standard of the day, not allowing his tenants to sublet, thereby preventing middlemen from extorting excessive rents. Also, he had no cotier tenants, those who offered free labour instead of rent, often treated as slave labour, on his land. Furthermore, he was an extensive employer in the area and usually paid the average daily rate at the time. Richard also had the current mansion house built at Garbley in 1819. Anti-Catholic tendencies. The darker side of his nature arose when matters of religion were involved. The whole of the family were staunch Protestants, and Richard's brother Poer was Archbishop of Tuam. Jesus. They actively supported the local Bible Society and were not above the use of intimidation to aid the proselytizing elements in the town. Most of the worst things done by the 2nd Earl were motivated by his religious convictions. See how religion causes war. Although some were definitely motivated by self-interest. He actively opposed giving any rights to Catholics and voted against the Catholic Emancipation Bill. Initially, he also opposed the Act of Union, but changed sides when he found that substantial rewards were available for those willing to vote the right way. He was rewarded for his, quote, loyalty with a post as Postmaster General and later as Master of the Mint. Richard founded a Cistercian house for nuns and their servants at his birthplace, Crawford Tarrant in Dorset. He also has been credited, yeah, we read that probably erroneously, Sherborne Castle in Dorset. It may be more than coincidence that Walter Le Poer was sheriff. Yeah, sheriff was also a collector of a lay subsidy. Yeah, we've read that, tax collectors. My goodness, described as possibly an outsider, not native to Devon. And then we've got a couple of, oh, I didn't see these comments. That's interesting. This was when I used to have comments on my blog, but somehow I think it might have been, I don't know what it was, but I was getting hundreds of spam comments that I just couldn't keep up. So I don't do comments anymore, but there are a couple of comments here. Let's have a look. This is Barbara Kennedy. I'm so sorry. This is 2 years ago. I discovered your poetry in motion, the genealogy of the Poer clan, Le Poer de la Poer, as researched by Francis Mary, Angela's Cash's page, and noticed you could have a lot more traffic. I found that the key to running a website is making sure the visitors you are getting are interested in your subject matter. We can send you targeted. See, that's just somebody looking, you know, that's not, yeah, that's just somebody. That's why I stopped dealing with comments. You can contact me different ways. So that's the end of the first part, and I'll do the other parts in the coming days. But I stopped. You can get in touch with me on Facebook, Angela Power Disney, or you can email me at angelapowerdisney@gmail.com, or in comments under these videos. And I've read this, you know, a couple of times, but it's still shocks me. It's as if somebody took pins of the genealogy and put them on a map, and then my family and I were just located in these places or interbred. You know, just bizarre. Anyway, angelascashes.org. Thanks. Please like, subscribe, share, and feel free to contact me. And well done, Francis Mary, again.